Program Services for the 300 Committee. It's great to have you all here tonight, and we're delighted to have Karro Frost here as our speaker, who will talk about picking your battles with invasive plants. Before we introduce Karro, I'd like to say a few words about the 300 Committee, also I know quite familiar to most of you. We are now in our 40th year of protecting open space across Falmouth for conservation, wildlife, and plant habitat, recreation, farming, clean drinking water, and climate change mitigation. To date, we've preserved 2,600 acres in all of Falmouth's 7 villages. Our many beautiful open spaces are near and dear to all of our hearts and are really important for our community health and for our for the natural beauty of Falmouth and for quality of life here. We're really excited about a couple of new land acquisitions that are currently in process. Both will preserve important natural resources while also supporting affordable housing goals for Falmouth. The first is a 4-acre acquisition in Wacoit, a partnership with the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, DCR, and the Falmouth Housing Trust. 3 acres will be owned by the state and permanently protected as part of the Wacoit Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, otherwise known as Webner. It's easier to say that. The remaining acre will be used for the construction of several deed-restricted, fully affordable homes. The much larger North Falmouth Woodlands project will preserve 48 acres of priority habitat, wetlands, and prime forest, with about 7.5 acres reserved for workforce housing to be developed by Habitat for Humanity of Cape Cod. This land is adjacent to the North Falmouth Elementary School, and the protected acres serve a part of town where there's relatively little preserved open space. And we continue to work with town, state, federal, and private partners as we follow our tried and true process, identifying, ranking, appraising, negotiating, and contracting for the highest priority lands for permanent conservation. There are always new parcels in our sites, and it's amazing. They just keep coming, which is a good thing. One more very exciting piece of news. We're on the verge of moving into our new headquarters at 13 Thomas Landers Road, the Millstone Farm property. We'll let you know when we get there, and then we'll encourage you to come and visit. We're very excited about the new space, and it's going to be a whole new chapter for the 300 Committee. We are grateful to all of you who are our members, whose support is critical to our work and to our continued success. Membership support helps us also to manage and steward the lands that we work so hard to protect. And they also help provide a wide variety, provide us with funds to present outreach and educational programs like tonight's talk. If you're not a member, we do hope you will consider joining us. And now I'd like to introduce Allison Leshin, who is the co-chair of our outreach committee, who has a few more things to say, and she'll then introduce Karro, our speaker. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you. Before I introduce Karro, I just want to introduce another fun program that the 300 Committee is doing, the 300-mile challenge. So the idea is that you keep track of the walks that you take on the conservation parcels in town. They don't have to be 300 Committee. They can be, the town-owned or state or whatever. And we've got tally sheets, and when you get to 100 miles, you get a little pin like this, and when you get to 200 miles, you get another little pin. They say like 100 miles, 200 miles, and when you get to 300 miles, you get a 300-mile pin and this really cool fanny pack. If that is not enough incentive, I don't know what would be. So, please get out there and enjoy all these beautiful parcels. See, then you can pin all your pins on the. That's the idea. You can be like the coolest person in the woods. So again, you can, on our website, we have more information about that, and you can either download the tracker and keep track of it like an Excel spreadsheet on your computer, or you can print it out and take notes when you go. And the challenge I've found is trying to remember to record, but anyway. So now I will introduce Karro, our speaker. So Karro Frost is the Conservation Planning Botanist for the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, which that's a position she's held since January of 2013. Before that, she was a senior scientist with New England Environmental, which is a consulting firm in Amherst. She received both her undergraduate degree in geography and master's degree in environment, technology, and society from Clark University in Worcester, Mass., and she lives in Central Mass. Her work is focused on the endangered, threatened, and special concern plant species in the state, which sometimes includes removing problem invasive species.
All right, thank you all for coming. My goodness, what a crowd. I love this. This is a talk that I've actually given before, so if you have heard me talk, you may have heard parts of this. It may sound like I'm repeating myself, but every talk that I give is always a new one. So I'm talking about picking your battles with invasive plants. I'm also talking about some of the plants that are newly listed and in Massachusetts on the invasive plant list. And I'm also going to be talking about some that I'm particularly concerned about that I've seen that have shown up on Cape Cod that seem to be a real problem here. So what is the big deal with non-native invasive plants? And my gosh, I have a chickadee up there. That's not a non-native invasive plant. Well, the main problem is that these plants impact everything else around them, including animals and other plants. So what is an invasive plant? They're non-native, so they don't occur here naturally. They're not part of our normal environment. They have spread, or they are likely to spread, into an area that is minimally maintained. That means it could include places like along the edges of highways, actually. We're starting to include that in the MIPAG definition. It could include, a place that gets burned regularly, like some of the sand plain grasslands that need some type of management in order to stay open. Or it could include places like where I live, where we do nothing to our forests other than walk through them on occasion. I live next to conservation land where it's a no-touch conservation land. You're not allowed to do anything there. Those plants are likely to cause economic or environmental harm by developing self-sustaining populations. So, more about what's the big deal. 2015, there were over 100 million acres in the US with invasive plants, infested with it. And we lose about 3 million, these are older numbers too, lose about 3 million each year, which is about half the size of Rhode Island. That's a lot of land. I mean, these are big numbers, mind-blowingly big. A lot of public land lost. 42% of endangered species are impacted by invasive species, and about 16% of the extinctions of plants and animals are due specifically to introduced invasive species. So more about big numbers here. 2010, control of invasive species in North America was estimated to cost about $26 billion. In 2019, 9 years later, globally, the cost was estimated to be $423 billion. That's a lot of money, and that's expected to double every 4 years. We're talking about a lot of money going into control. So we really don't want these on our landscapes. We don't want them getting introduced. Where did they come from? A number of them have come in through the horticultural trade. They were brought in, some of them were brought in through arboretums. They looked at them and said, that's a pretty plant, we could sell that. And they did. And we all love our pretty flowers. Don't touch that. I mean, we all go crazy with that. We've got our daffodils and our tulips and stuff blooming now. They're not invasive. But, you know, that eye candy that we love to see, we'll buy anything sometimes. So it's just something to remember and think about. Conservation organizations such as Mass Wildlife. We introduced a lot of stuff. We gave away things like multiflora rose and autumn olive to hunters. You know, they would get their license and we'd go, here, have a sapling. This is great for the birds. Real problem. Some of it we don't know where it came from. We assume it came in on ballast or accidental, sometimes on pallets. And I think that these numbers are probably old at this point. I think there's a higher percent that has come in on the horticultural trade and is still coming in on the horticultural trade, unfortunately. They don't want to be guilty, but I think they need to be more responsible than they are about it. Personally, personal opinion. That's not the opinion of Mass Wildlife, that's my opinion. So I've referred to a couple times about the Massachusetts Prohibited Plant List. That's a list that was created by a group called the Massachusetts Invasive Plant Advisory Group, or MIPAG, of which I am a member. We have representatives from several state agencies, including Mass DOT, Mass Wildlife, DCR, Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. We have a number of researchers, people who are based in universities, who are working with us, and we have people from the horticultural and green industry. The list itself was originally suggested by MIPAG to MDAR, which is Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. I'm going to say MDAR because that's a lot of words to say together, syllables. And MDAR pretty much took everything that MIPAG had suggested originally. They also took some of the federal species that were considered noxious weeds and put them on that list. Since that list was created, there have been new species that have been added occasionally. We now have a pretty active group that is trying to review and push more species on, but you need to know that the Massachusetts Prohibited Plant List is not a final list. It is not the list of all invasive plants. It's the only list that we have right now, and MDAR is the regulatory body that will, if there's a plant on that list and it's being sold, MDAR will actually go and deal with the sales. So they will, if someone is selling wreaths of bittersweet, they'll go check it out and tell them that you can't sell that in the state. Bittersweet cannot be sold. Asian bittersweet wreaths are illegal. So they're the ones who deal with that. They also will go to the big stores, you know, like Target, or it used to be Christmas tree shops used to get checked regularly, or Home Depot, or wherever there's plants being sold. They'll do a walkthrough, as well as going through, you know, the small nurseries and making sure that everything that is being sold is legal to be sold. So what is the big deal? Not all non-native plants are invasive. That's the first part. You need to know that. As I've referred to the daffodils outside, I just happened to be looking outside and saw the daffodils out there. They look beautiful. But often non-natives, we'll start with this, there's an impact on our wildlife, our native wildlife species. So our native birds, our small mammals, our large mammals need native plants to survive. So they need to be able to eat berries and seeds. They need to be able to eat insects, caterpillars, beetles, whatever out there. Invasive plants tend to shade out, crowd out native plants, making it very hard for the native plants that support and supply berries, nuts, insects to our native wildlife. So if we don't have any native plants, we don't have any food for caterpillars or for our wildlife. And one example, going back to the beginning of my slides where we had that little chickadee with the caterpillar in its mouth, that chickadee needs somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to feed its family of 4. That's a lot of caterpillars. And the only way they can get them is by picking caterpillars off of native plants, because our insects can't eat, can't digest the non-native plants. I mean, we'll get some bugs on stuff that's non-native, but the majority is we need to have native plants so that our wildlife around us can survive. So, with climate change, everyone knows about this, Massachusetts is going to be warmer, and there are now invasive plants that are in the southern states, such as this map shows South Carolina. We know from research that the invasive plants that are in the south are moving fast, fairly fast. We are set, as in New England in general, is set to be a recipient of many, many invasive species that are currently pretty well established in the south. They're going to be moving north. They're likely not to be as tolerant of the temperatures that are predicted for the south. So they're going to kind of move out of that area and they're going to land where we are. We need to do whatever we can to slow that down. And my note to myself is this summer, I just saw the predictions, is supposed to be the hottest one yet, which is really scary. So here's some photos of some invasive plants. Just, you probably will know them if you've been paying any attention to invasives at all. We've got some Norway maple, cypress spurge, goutweed, Japanese stiltgrass, multiflora rose, Japanese barberry, autumn olive, dame's rocket, mile-a-minute, coltsfoot, garlic mustard, purple loosestrife, Japanese knotweed, trumpet creeper, winged euonymus, Callery pear, etc. Overwhelming. We all see these all the time. So, just to go over some of the characteristics of our non-native species and why they're a problem here. I've already mentioned this before. Non-native plants typically have few or no insect herbivores or other herbivores. Often deer don't like the non-natives either. We're all really pleased. Let's get a plant that deer won't eat. But we don't want those plants in our forest. We want the deer to stay in the forest. So you get them and they spread into the forest, we have our deer coming into our gardens and our yards. Some of the other characteristics, we have high seed production or long-lasting viable seeds in the soil. The seed can be easily transported to new locations by the wind or by birds eating them and then spreading the seeds, or by sticking to the fur or shoes or even car tires and transporting the seeds around. The roots can send up, you cut the top of the plant, the roots will send up new shoots all over the place. Those are new suckers or new ramets. They have an ability to adapt to lots of different conditions often. Quick growing, shade out other plants. Some of them can self-pollinate, so you only need one plant and you can get a population. Or you can have many different characters, all of those on one species. Another question I get is, where do the invasive plants come from? Well, you can see we are in that yellow zone. That's the temperate zone. Most of our plants have come from that northern temperate zone. So we've got, Norway spruce, Norway maple, Japanese knotweed, Japanese barberry, etc. Those are all temperate zones. We're just starting to get some that are coming in from Australia, Africa, and South America. We don't have lots from there yet, but the industry is starting to push some of those species in. So a few examples of the high seed production would be purple loosestrife. We get, thousands of seeds from a plant of purple loosestrife. High seed, a long seed bank longevity. Mile a minute, we know that those seeds will last for at least 7 years. So if you go through and you feel like, I have pulled all of those seeds out, I've gotten all of those plants, I'm done, don't need to worry about this, you do. You need to go back. A month later, and then a month later, and a month later, and then next year, every single month as well, because those seeds will just keep coming up for at least another 7 years. Maybe longer, maybe not, but the seed transportation, a couple examples, winged fruits like coltsfoot, dandelions, or swallowwort that puff and blow on the breezes. We know that robins, chickadees, blackbirds, blue jays, etc. will eat fruits and spread the seeds. And from personal experience, I have seen birds that have gotten into deer fur on their feet. Japanese stiltgrass is a great example where I saw the little seeds get stuck, and I would find patches where the deer had crossed into the woods 200, 300 feet away from the road, and I could see that the deer had walked here and the seeds had been sucked off in the mud, and I had Japanese stiltgrass growing there, which is, you think of a lot of the invasives come in very close to the edges and they'll be in the woods. Well, these were being transported much further than 50 feet. They were way over. So lots of shoots and ramets on the same plant. We all know the Japanese knotweed can be a real problem. I battle with glossy buckthorn all the time near me. I don't know how much you have Japanese you have glossy buckthorn here too. So one of the descriptions when I wrote up to propose calorie pear, I ran across this description of it. This is, they were looking for a pear root that they could graft pear trees onto that was not susceptible to I'm not going to say this right, the fire virus. Fire blight virus. And calorie pear seemed to have the most resistance, and it was growing in China. So somebody went to China and collected lots and lots and lots of samples of it. He wrote in his journals, Pyrus caloriana is simply a marvel. One finds it growing under all sorts of conditions. One time on dry, sterile mountain slopes, then again with its roots in standing water at the edge of a pond. Sometimes in an open pine forest. Then again among the scrub on blue stone ledges in the burning sun. Sometimes in low bamboo jungle, etc., etc. Quite the marvel. So calorie pear, people often are confused about this. Bradford pear is a variety. It was one tree that someone saw while they were growing out calorie pears. And that person looked at it and said, that's a great, beautiful, it doesn't have thorns, it doesn't, it's beautifully shaped, it's pretty. We should call this one Bradford pear. And so they would take samples of it and then graft it onto the rootstock of other ones. And because calorie pear cannot self-pollinate itself, it was considered sterile. And it was. It could not self-pollinate itself. It was all from the same plant. It just happened to be spread all over the country. But then they decided that they would add some other varieties in from other plants. And suddenly we started to get calorie pear producing hundreds of fruits. And it does. Real huge, huge problem to the south of us, just starting to be a problem here. So what we're dealing with is calorie pear. Sometimes they are Bradford pears, but they're not necessarily 100% Bradford pears. There's all sorts of different names for those varieties. Another adaptation, the plants are nitrogen fixers. Autumn olive fixes nitrogen. You can find it in low nitrogen soil. So your sandy soils are great for autumn olive. It can pull in lots of nitrogen where other plants can't grow. It can. Some of them are fast growing, like tree of heaven. And I can't mention tree of heaven without talking about another invasive, this time an insect. Just so that everybody knows about it, Massachusetts Department of Ag Resources is trying really hard to stay in front of this one and to keep it from being a major pest in our state. Not only does it like to eat tree of heaven, but it will also eat walnuts, grapes, hardwood trees such as maples, oaks, cherries, etc. And when starving, it will also eat pines and hemlocks and etc. Just like, you know, when we have spongy moth invasions, they eat just about everything too. So very similar. Easy to report. If you see the bugs, report it. Go onto that site, mass.gov/spotted-lanternfly. We have a couple of plants I mentioned that only need one plant and they can create a population, an invasion. One of them is garlic mustard. You only need one garlic mustard plant before you can have hundreds. Japanese barberry is the same way. I imagine that probably common European barberry is the same. So, most important, before you plant, think what you're doing. Best way to prevent invasive plants on our landscape is not to plant them originally. Think, is this a native plant that I'm putting in? And if it's a plant that's at a plant swap, and there's a description that says, this grows quickly, it spreads easily, no matter how pretty, don't plant it. Don't plant it. So where to start beyond what I've already presented? Let's talk about starting. Start with, what do you have on your property that's a problem? And also, what do you have that's special? So know what you have on your property. Look at what is growing around in the community. Are there invasives that are likely to come in and be a problem? And what are the most important areas on your property? You should know, what do you want to protect mostly? What is the most important thing? So if you want to identify the invasive plants, you can ask or hire an expert. You can use a smartphone app or more than one just to double check it. One of my favorites personally, because I don't know everything. I mean, I'm a botanist. I've been a botanist for 30 years, but I still run into plants I don't know. iNaturalist is great. You can post things out there. You will get other people's opinions. It has an AI part of it that will say, we think it's X. And you can say, maybe, I'm not sure, but I can put it up as that, and someone else will come along and say, oh my gosh, no, it's this, not that. Or they'll say, yeah, it's definitely that. I just came back from a trip in New Mexico and Arizona where I was looking at plants every day that I didn't know. I mean, we were looking at cactus. I don't know cactus. I mean, we have prickly pear here, but our prickly pear are not the same plants that we were seeing out in Arizona and New Mexico. Totally different punches out there. And I would put things up, and people were coming along and following me for the 2 weeks I was out there and saying, okay, yes, you got that one right. No, I think you need to look at this. And there were plants that I put up and said, this is a plant. And people would come along and give me suggestions, which was great. So that was my iNaturalist story. Google Lens, if you take pictures and you have a Gmail account, you probably have a Google photo account. You can use something called Lens. It has an AI part of it as well. It'll help identify it. Picture this, which is one that's on iPads, available for iPads and iPhones. So I have never used it since I'm an Android user. Same thing with PlantNet. I've heard from other people who have iPhones that they like these. If you have an iPhone and you use it, it's worth trying those to try. There's also something called Seek, which was made by iNaturalist, which was designed for children, but I've heard adults like to use it too. The AI, the artificial intelligence in Seek, though, has not been updated for a while. So they've been updating the stuff for iNaturalist, but they haven't been pushing those down into Seek as fast. So it's not quite as nimble as iNaturalist has been. So a couple other things you can get. Weed books. Some of my favorites are up here. A Guide to Invasive Plants in Massachusetts, 3rd edition. I'm working on editing that right now, trying to push up the new plants that we've listed over the last couple years. It's unfortunately not available, but it's a great deal when it comes back up. I'm hoping that it'll be back up and available next year. There's a book called Weeds of the Northeast that's from '97. There's always Newcomb's Wildflower Guide, which is a great little wildflower guide, easy to use. The names of the plants have changed, not so much the common names, but the scientific names have changed a lot. But the plants are still the plants, you know? You can still find out what they are. Gleason and Quanquist and Arthur Haynes are both fairly technical guides. You're going to have to read them. They're dry reading. They're not lots of pretty pictures, but they'll get you where you need to go if you have the patience. And personally, I love Douglas Ptolemy's Bringing Nature Home, 2nd edition. Lots of good information in there. So, talking about what are the special areas on your property that you want to protect no matter what. So this could be a place with high native plant diversity, or it might have rare plants or other rare species, or it might just be a place where you really enjoy going and spending time. A couple of mine, I have Isotria verticillata, or large world pogonia, on my property. This is a population that I want to keep the glossy buckthorn, the Asian bittersweet, the winged euonymus out of. I mean, I make sure that it's not getting in there. Those are the ones that come into my woods regularly. This is another place. This is a spot on the edge of a pond. I love going here and just being here. You can see I'm in a very wooded area. But this is a spot that's really special to me. And I also want to make sure that we don't have invasives coming into this area. So in looking at whether, how to control it, if you have a lot of invasives on your property, you want to start somewhere. You might look at the ease of the control. So how easily is that plant going to be to control? Does the species have long-lived seeds? Those seeds are going to be sitting in the ground, and are you going to be pulling it up forever? Does it re-sprout easily? How many treatments are you going to need to do, and how involved are they? And are there any kinds of side effects of the specific things, such as if you did a chemical or a mechanical, what kinds of side effects are you going to have? Some of the other options, burning or flooding or grazing or some of the biological controls, are there side effects? Something to think about as you move forwards with trying to control things. Do you have just a few spots? Do you have plants distributed everywhere? Are they coming in from other populations off of your property? Things to think about as you look at and work on controlling yours. So where to start is going to be different for every single person, and probably for every organization. I mean, I think the 300 committee needs to be thinking about what are their most important, I'm sorry, I'm giving you advice, but think about what is your most important properties. Where should we be putting in our energies to control the invasives? Which ones are we going to really work on to try and control invasives on? So That would be my thought of what you wanted to do, but you may have a different answer, and that's okay. You know, you want to start someplace. You might want to start with the low-hanging fruit that are the most easily controlled. Like you might want to, you know, be doing some pulling or something. You might want to be protecting the special areas, like I just suggested. Most important, reassess after a couple years. Is this technique working? Am I getting where I want to go? Because if you're not reassessing, you're just going to feel very, very frustrated and feel like you haven't gone anywhere and you're not getting there. You may need to refigure how you're going to do things. Here's somebody who's pulling pulling garlic mustard. Might be working in an area where there's poison ivy. You want to make sure you have gloves on. For something like garlic mustard, if you're pulling it after it has started to flower, you're going to have to bag the whole plant. Because if you just pull it and drop it, it'll keep developing those seeds and they'll grow next year. Yes?
Take it home and make salad.
You can do that. It depends on where it's growing, though. I don't like picking it on the sides of roads and taking it home. But, this looks like a nice wooded area. That'd be great. You can make all kinds of things out of it, Another tool you might want to use is a polar bear or a weed wrench. The polar bear is a brand name for weed wrench. Weed wrenches used to be a brand name, and then they stopped making them. But it's a vice grip. It grabs the plant, and then it levers it out. There's some plants that this works really well on. Shrubs that would be hard to pull otherwise, especially if it's something that's in rockier soil or really compacted soil. This would be a great tool to use. They do tend to be heavy, so you're not really going to want to hike a long way with them unless you've got a couple people who are willing to share the load.
They have smaller ones too for smaller plants.
Do they? I don't have them. Personally, I don't have one, so. Another biological controls for purple loosestrife. Our state is covered with the Galeaceria purple loosestrife beetles, which is great. But as all biological controls, they're not perfect. They're not going to completely wipe out purple loosestrife. And there's going to be some years, because they have to have it. They survive if there's purple loosestrife. You looked surprised in the back. Unfortunately, they don't. So biological controls rely on the plants being there and continuing to be there. There will be years where there are lots of beetles, and you'll see very few purple loosestrife flowers. The next year you might see lots of loosestrife and not many beetles. So it's an uneven system, and it always will be. But it has made a huge difference from what I have seen in the state. There are a few times where I've gone, wow, I'm surprised that there's that much loosestrife there. But most of the time, that's not the case. Most of the time, it's like, oh, looks like things are working here. In the past, we've suggested mulch and landscape fabric. No longer. Don't suggest it. I've heard from too many people that this has been a problem. The landscape fabric, for one, is very hard to work with, and once things start growing in it and through it, you can't get it. It's very hard to pull out. So we don't suggest it. I had a friend who recently was telling me about how she got rid of goutweed. Instead of using this, she was just covering it with cardboard for a year. Got some big boxes and put down lots of big boxes over her patch, and it killed it, which was like, yes, this is what we wanted to. And this is how we want to get rid of that. I recommend that over doing this. One other method you can do if you don't have lots, you can do a cutting. And you can cut it all the way down to the ground and do repeat checks regularly, monthly. Look for any little sprouts that are coming up and take them off immediately. when you have trees, particularly woody shrubs, they really need to have the green leaves to pull, create energy and put that into their roots and store it. When they don't have that, they can't survive. So this would be some way of taking out shrubs or small trees. Norway maples I've done this with. Usually they're gone. And even with Asian bittersweet, if you don't have very many, you just have a couple vines, you can do this. It is intensive work. You do have to be committed to going back and checking regularly. If you choose to use herbicides, there's a lot of cautions on there. Use with caution, read the labels, and follow the directions. You don't want to get sick because you're using herbicide. That's not the idea. Most of them have specific directions as to how you should protect yourself. Make sure that you do and follow those. And if you're wearing protective clothing, wash that separately. And this is all stuff that if you're an herbicide applicator, like I am, they will tell you every year, make sure you're following these advice. So this is something that's on those labels that you get if you were to buy something from the store, but it also is something that is, as an applicator, you're told regularly, make sure you follow these. You want to avoid spraying herbicide on flowers. We want to protect the bees as much as possible. Even if it's not going to hurt them, according to the label, you still don't want them to get impacted by landing on the swallowwort flowers as you're spraying the flowerwort. You want them, no flowers there for them to land on and go after. You can either take the flowers off or do a cut stem application instead. Don't ever spray vegetation over your head. You're going to end up with spray coming on you. You don't want that. And don't spray on windy days. So these are all things that are part of the applicator's knowledge. I think there are people here on the Cape. I know there are people on Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket that rent out goats to help control the invasive plants. I know for a fact that goats love Japanese knotweed. I've fed it to my neighbor's goats a few times. And they do like to eat things that are up, like trees. So Norway maples are great for them, as long as they're not high, tall. But they'd eat all the little ones. You might control, we use control burning in mass wildlife. At Crane particularly, I know that we have done some burning as well. We've worked with the 300 committee at Coonamessett. I think there's probably been other sites that I just don't know. But it does make a big difference as far as controlling some invasives. And it does depend on the time of year that you burn, what you end up controlling. Mostly this is done by large conservation organizations such as Mass Wildlife, DCR, or the Nature Conservancy. It does need permits and trainings. We recommend that you don't do this at your own home. Don't just decide that you want to burn an area. And they do have burn permits, I know, but it's good not to burn a whole field or something without having some good knowledge about it. So just to review some of the picking your battles pieces, you might want to start with the low-hanging fruit, or you might want to start in one area that has special plants. One of the things I also recommend is start at the same place every time you go out. So if you're working in an area and you have a lot of invasives and you're trying to work out from an area, always start at the center, make sure that you're working out, or always start at the same end and keep working the same direction, so that you get everything. When you're going back monthly, you can check from one end to another. Have a rhythm to it, have a system in mind. Don't try and do hit or miss. This time I'm going to go over here, and this time I'm going to go over here. Always start from one place and work out from there, so that you've got that system. You can have one patch at least that's controlled. and always reassess. Keep on reassessing. So some of the species that have been newly listed include Japanese black pine. MDAR is actually holding a hearing on this. They listed it, and then they found out from the people who grow bonsai that it is one of their favorite trees for bonsai. And they are holding a hearing tomorrow morning from 10 to 11. And people are invited to go to that hearing. I think you can go to the MDAR website, and it's a Zoom meeting. They also will accept comments until 5 p.m. tomorrow on it. But it's become a major problem, certainly on Nantucket. I know that it's occurring here as well. I don't know how much it's occurring on the Cape, but I know it's some. So they were having a really hard time with it in their natural lands. They really wanted to see it listed, prepared the proposal, and MyPAG said, yes, we think that's a reasonable proposal. Another listed species just come on is Scotch broom. Again, this is another one that came from the people on Nantucket that were very concerned about its impact on their natural areas. And they prepared their listing proposal for MyPAG, and MyPAG voted on it. Along with those two, also weeping lovegrass, Eragrostis curvula. We know this is on the Cape. This photo from Bob was taken on the Cape. I'm particularly concerned about non-native grasses. The people love the way grasses look recently. This particular grass is from Africa. One of the things that a lot of the grasses have a lot of eye appeal. They're very pretty, but then they get ignored when they go into other areas, and people go, it's a grass, so what? Well, it has the same damage, causes the same damage that everything else does. It doesn't get eaten, it just keeps spreading, it crowds out native species, it becomes a problem. And we've got more grasses that are coming in. We already have grass problems. We have reed canary grass. We have Japanese stilt grass. We have, microstygium. Oops, sorry, hitting the wrong button here. So just something to think about. Miscanthus is another one there.
There's a lot of that one.
Yeah, so lots of stuff to pay attention. Don't just plant native grasses. We have beautiful, especially down here, you've got gorgeous native grasses. Another newly listed species is wall lettuce, Mysalus muralis. I didn't think that there was lots of this in the state. I knew that it was in certain areas. Last summer, I felt like every single place I went, I was finding this. It's got these really distinctive looking leaves, and I kept finding it. It was just like, oh my God, I can't believe this is as often as spread as it was. We also, MyPAG listed Pyrus calleriana. The hearing tomorrow is also including this because the pear orchards really want to be able to still get the rootstock from Pyrus calleriana. So we're hoping that MyPAG will say, yes, you can have roots of this plant, but that's it. No, nothing else. Nothing above ground, just the ones that have been put on that rootstock. What was that?
That's attractive.
Yeah. It's very pretty, but it's in bloom right now. I was seeing it on the highway as I drove down today. This one just got listed in December. I don't think it's made it onto the prohibited plant list yet, but I think that they probably will do that soon. This is the European alder. Really distinctive. You'll notice the leaves have that little bump in them. They have an indent where most of the rest of our alders have a point. these guys. And when they're young, they don't have that. You have to wait until the plants get older to actually get that indentation on it. So there's a few plants that I'm specifically concerned with that are not necessarily listed yet. So as I said, the lists aren't final. So things to think about. This one is listed, the gray willow, Salix cinerea. It has a relative called Salix atrocinerea that's very closely related. The two species tend to get mixed together. One tends to be more of a shrub, one tends to be more of a tree, according to the... But it's particularly a concern because, like grasses, willows tend to get ignored. People go, oh, it's a willow, and don't try and figure out which willow. This one is easier to tell because it gets ribbed bark that you can kind of see on it. If you go on the walk tomorrow, you'll see it. There's lots of it, unfortunately. It takes over a lot of the coastal plain pond shores where we have lots of rare plants, so it's a real concern as far as I'm concerned. Common yucca is not a native plant here. It is native in America. It goes as far north as Maryland and Delaware. That's its native range. That's the extent of its native range. Clearly it grows here, but it's not native here. So it can be a real problem. It can be really hard to get rid of. I remember working at Webner last spring trying to dig it up, and I heard that it was back with a vengeance by the end of the summer. One that I'm working on now is the Chinese bush clover, Lesbedeza cuneata. We have a lot of native Lesbedezas. Somehow this one is there, and it's spreading. Major problem. If you see this plant, please put it into iNaturalist for me so that as I bring it up in front of the committee, I have as many points as possible in iNaturalist. That'd be great, because I use that as one of our references. And we use herbarium records. We use an online program called EdMaps. We also will use anything else that we can grab, one of which is iNaturalist. So if you see this plant, please document it. One that I'm concerned with is Japanese holly, Ilex crenata. This one is often confused with inkberry, Ilex glabra. So I really want, it's another one that has not yet been listed, but needs to be. We're seeing it more and more and more and more on the landscape. English ivy. So we're seeing it do that here. My picture going up the tree was actually taken in New Mexico. So it's not just here. It's doing this everywhere. As we were walking around today, we were on the...
Two ponds.
Well, it wasn't on two ponds.
Mount Lyle.
Yeah, it's a
Lyle Mount.
yeah, where it had completely taken over a fallen log, had gone into seed, was just shocking. You didn't want to go any further. It kind of stopped you in your tracks. Another one we have tried, we've suggested to the committee that this one get listed. They said we didn't have enough information. So for all of these, please, if you are on iNaturalist, please document the invasives such as this. These are really important to do. It's really, this is where citizen science can really help those of us that are trying to get these things done. So I have to thank Cynthia Bentner, who used to work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. She provided me with a lot of how to apply, how do you go about taking care of the invasives. And I always have to talk about rare species, since I work there. Things that you can do. We're past tax season, so you can ignore parts of that. And we have the e-newsletter. We also have a magazine, which this month, half of that magazine is about spring ephemerals, and it just came out. It's great. I was on the article on that one. And I'll take questions.